So, where we are now, this is a tomb from Jericho. Tombs are really important to us because they tell us a lot about life, even though they're full of dead stuff and the paraphernalia that goes with it. In Jericho, the tombs often tell us that the Egyptian influence in that region of Canaan was very, very strong. And at times Egypt controlled the whole of Canaan. And the tombs do that very well for us, because if you look at it, what strikes you as odd about it being a tomb?
Seed.
We've got seeds, they've got walking sticks, there's plates to eat off, there's cutlery to eat with. Maybe the water jars and so on at the back have just been put in there for storage, but on the other hand, there's loads of stuff even in here that these people would need in the afterlife. Okay? So the Egyptian influence is very strong indeed. Also, in a particular period of Jericho's history, the people being buried in the tombs were buried with the Egyptian scarab beetle. Do you know what I mean when I talk about that? It's a beetle. I have one here, but it's very, very tiny. Can you see this here? This little beetle, always viewed from the top. Okay, but there would be a bigger one. And you put it over your heart and basically sort of covers your sins when you're trying to get into the afterlife. Okay, so this is what the Egyptians did. I bought this as real, by the way, and it's 100% fake, no question about it. But it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It does the job for me, even though it's tiny. Sorry.
Bracelets too.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. I mean, they're quite quite common, in fact, those. But with the ones that people were buried with, when you take them and turn them over, on the underside would be a cartouche. Usually a cartouche of the king under whose reign you died. So even what we would call the Canaanites in Jericho would be buried according to this Egyptian tradition. And this is really, really crucial for us, because those cartouches in the burial sites continue at Jericho until the reign of Amenhotep III. Now, all this afternoon is where this morning comes back to bite you, okay? So I don't do a test, but I'm going to be asking you questions all afternoon about what we did this morning. Amenhotep III is the guy that had the temple with the curses on. You remember? And who was the odd king, or the odd people that he cursed? The wanderers, the Shasu of Yahweh, okay? He's Amenhotep III, 1400-ish BC. He has scarab beetles, cartouches, in the Jericho tombs. What does that tell us? Because it's very important. It tells us that in 1400 BC, people were being buried properly in Jericho, which means the city was alive and functioning at that time. Because the big argument against Jericho being the Jericho of Joshua's time is that by the time Joshua and his people arrived, Jericho was dead. It was just a hill with some Bedouin tents on. It was all over. But actually, these burials tell us that life was continuing as normal, because when life is continuing as normal, you bury people in the ritualistic fashion. If the city is dead, then you just dig in holes and burying people left, right and centre. So that's very important to start with. There's been a lot of controversy about Jericho, which is all gradually kind of clearing. I admit I've been doing this a long time, and all the sort of times when I would talk about anything, Jericho was the question mark. Are we really just trying to kid ourselves, or does it really portray the sort of Joshua campaign kind of thing? And actually, as time has gone on, more and more discoveries, more and more clarification about the way that things have sometimes been presented. And there's absolutely no question that the Jericho you can go to today and stand on that mound is the Jericho of the Joshua campaign. There are lots of clues to that. First of all, we know the city's there. We know that at one point in its history it was completely destroyed. So if you go and look at the ruins, have you been there? No, okay. If you go and look at the ruins of Jericho, you can see, you don't need to be an archaeologist, you can see across the whole site is a big black line, buried deep in the different layers. And that big black line is what's called a destruction layer. Everything was destroyed and everything was burned. And it's all the charred ruins of ancient Jericho. Well, that's what we'd expect looking at the Joshua campaign, right? Because the city was utterly destroyed, it was burned to the ground. Even the mud brick and so on of the walls, it's all burnt, it's all destroyed. Interestingly, fire doesn't destroy everything. One of the things that fire preserves, and you can see examples behind you, is of course clay pots. We put clay pots into extremes of temperature in order to preserve them. And what we find in the destruction layer, you can see photos online or in books, is we find at that time large jars full of grain. Yeah, it's really good, full of grain. And then just have to do a little bit of detective work. And I've pastored a church now for a long time, but I used to be a policeman. And you've got to apply a bit of a detective's mind. In the age of the siege, what do large jars full of grain tell us about the siege?
It didn't last long.
It did not last very long, because normally in a siege, every last scrap of food is gone, and everything inedible along with it as well. So this siege, whatever it was, it didn't last very long. It also tells us this: the invading army at that time did not do what they always did, which was you attack a place, you not only take its good stuff, but you take its food. Right? Because you need that food to get you onto the next place where you're going to have your next campaign, so you take the food with you. This is left behind. What do large jars full of grain tell us about the sort of time of year in which this took place? Harvest time. Because if it was 6 months after harvest, you'd have half jars full of grain, okay? Because the food would be distributed in that way. Yeah, when you start opening up your Joshua, you read those early chapters, what you're finding is there are references to harvest and grain. In other words, Joshua's people are going to have to cross the river, the Jordan. Normally you can do that. That's not, it's not a major problem crossing the Jordan. It's not like the Red Sea. You're going to cross the Jordan. But there's one time of year when you cannot cross it ordinarily. What time of year is that? It tells us in the text. Keep going. Harvest time, right? At harvest time, the River Jordan's in full spate. You need to, have some way of getting across the river. And of course, the river divides the waters, and they get across the river. So it's harvest time. Also, the Lord says, when you get into the city, don't touch this stuff. But he says, after this, you will eat the grain of Canaan. So in other words, we're not going to take this stuff here and leave it. But when we move on from here, you're going to start eating the grain of Canaan. It's going to be there in the fields for you. You're going to start to take it. So again, all these little cultural details and references show us we're in the right place at the right time. The mud brick walls that are fallen down, you can see in Kathleen Kenyon's very detailed drawings actually of the mud brick walls of the city have fallen down outwards, and they provide this sort of lovely slope, this sort of step system that you can get up to the city, which is exactly what we find. Of course, the walls falling outwards. So, and interestingly, we're gradually losing this now because Jericho is a massive hill. I mean, it's not, we call it a city, but I mean, it's not city size, it's not London city size. It's a big hill with all these developments on it, but they're all mud brick. And the problem is you can't cover this. You can't stick it in a museum. So gradually, a lot of the stuff that was there maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago when it was first explored is disappearing. Because a lot of the city was made of mud brick, and mud brick eventually kind of, when there is rain or storms or wind or whatever, it gradually begins to decay and fall apart. But in the northeastern section of the city, part of the wall was still there. Why was it quite interesting that a bit of the wall didn't fall down? Because it's there, you could see it in old photographs. All the walls fell down except this bit in the corner. Yeah, we've got someone living in the walls or in the wall complex. And in the northeastern corner, there's a bit of the wall still there. Now, sadly, when you go now, it's disappearing. It's not so evident, but in sort of photographs going way back, it's still there, and you just think that's just incredible. It's more than a coincidence, surely. So there's lots of things like that. going on. But certainly the argument was Kathleen Kenyon here. She was the daughter of the director of the British Museum at the time when she went out to Jericho. But it had already been excavated by her mentor, John Garstang, who said, you know, absolutely, we're looking at the Jericho of Joshua's time, no question. She went out and threw a load of mud at that and really kind of messed things up and said, oh, the walls that Garstang is referring to are 1,000 years earlier. What she means was they were built 1,000 years earlier. We don't care when they were built. We care what? When they fell down, not when they were built. So there's stuff like that going on. There's been a lot of toing and throwing up, but actually, gradually, all those arguments are disappearing. And if you just take a step back and go, is there a city of Jericho? Yes. Was it completely destroyed in its lifetime? Absolutely. What are the evidences that, you know, there was a short siege followed by strange behaviour on everybody's part, you know, all this sort of thing, what time of year was it, harvest, so on and so on. Gradually you say, well, I'm really in the right place. And the big problem was not with Jericho, but what was the next place they moved on to capture and failed? Ai, great, okay. The big problem was that for sort of decades, Ai had been excavated, and Ai definitely does not allow for this period of Joshua's campaign. It's completely wrong. But what you have to remember is these places, most of these places, don't have signs saying, welcome to Ai. And Associates for Biblical Research in the States, excellent guys, you know, I'll get you to make a note of them and look at them later because they're really good guys. They've been doing some work just about between quarter and a half a mile away from what was called Ai. Quebec El Macateur is the name of the place they've been excavating. It perfectly fits. In other words, that's Ai, not the place that we've always called Ai. So once you get that sort of right, you're back in the pattern of the Joshua campaign, and you've got the right date, the right sort of timing for the destruction of the city.